Greetings and welcome to the Dungeon Inn. I am the Innkeeper, and today we are going to be going back to the very basics and discussing what is Dungeons and Dragons. Now, for those of you who have played D&D before, this may seem like a very simple question, but we tend to forget just how strange a game D&D can look like to people who aren't familiar with tabletop role-playing games and other fantasy tropes. We won't be going into any of the mechanics of the game today, rather we'll be starting with the basics and building a ground foundational understanding of what exactly D&D is. I will do a video on the mechanics and how they work, and I'll link to that up here, so if you want to jump ahead to that, be my guest. Dungeons & Dragons, or D&D, is a tabletop role-playing game originally created in the 1970s. Since then, it has been through numerous editions, the most recent of which, 5th edition, was released in 2014 and heralded the beginning of a massive resurgence for the hobby, attracting thousands of new players with its more simplified rule set and easy-to-pick-up mechanics. In Dungeons & Dragons, each player takes control of a character within a fantasy world that acts as their avatar. They complete quests, defeat monsters, and over the course of play tell a unique story that is special to them. Many people assume D&D is a video game, which is a fair assumption. Most games nowadays are. However, it's not. There are very few, if any, electronics involved with Dungeons & Dragons. It is a tabletop role-playing game. What this means, simply, is that you and your friends all sit around a table and play the game together. There are no computers or gaming consoles involved. It is a very old-school, face-to-face style game. Now, that isn't to say that D&D hasn't evolved with the times. There are now dedicated virtual tabletop apps like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds that allow you to play the game with people from all across the globe. But the essence of D&D is still the same. Not only is D&D not a video game, it also isn't a board game, which is its closest mainstream kin. There's no board involved with playing D&D, so by definition it can't be a board game. So what do you use to play D&D then? Surely you must need something more. Well, D&D is also known as a pen and paper RPG simply because they are the main tools you use, a pencil and paper. You use paper to keep track of how healthy your character is and a lot of your in-game stats. Use the dice to determine various outcomes and actions you may take within the game and whether or not they succeed and fail. But a majority of the game takes place in your mind and in the collective imaginations of everyone at the table. And that can be a very bizarre thing for people who haven't played tabletop games before to understand. How can a game be just in your mind? It doesn't actually exist. But let's take a step back before we jump forward to that. I mentioned that in D&D you play a character. What do I mean by that? Well, D&D is a storytelling game, and to tell that story, you take on the role of a character within this fantasy world. This character can be as different or as similar to you as you'd like, but you determine all of their traits. Their traits are simply, like any normal person, personalities, goals, needs, wants, hates, anything like that. Everything that defines a person, you determine about your character. When you play the game, you don't play as yourself, you play as this character within the world, and the decisions that you make are on behalf of your character, not you as a person. That is a very important point because it drives a lot of the conflict in D&D. You get to decide whether or not your character is a good character who wants to help others, or whether or not they are an evil character who is selfish and only looks out for themselves. This is called roleplay, and it is at the heart of Dungeons & Dragons. Your character is an adventurer, someone of exceptional talents who, via whatever circumstances you want to come up with, meets up with the other adventurers or characters belonging to people at the table. You work together to complete obstacles, be that fighting monsters, completing quests, rescuing damsels in distress, whatever your campaign calls for. Typically it takes place in some traditional high fantasy, Tolkien-esque world filled with orcs, elves, dwarves, all the traditional fantasy races. Okay, so you play characters and you exist within this fantasy world, but how does the game actually work? How does any of this have substance? Well, that is because one player is different to all the others. They are known as the Dungeon Master, and they actually don't have a character. Rather, they take control of the world of the game. They control all the monsters, all of the non-player characters you interact with, the storylines, any objects you find, the treasure, everything, anything you can imagine about the world of the game is controlled by the DM. Think about yourself in real life. You have control over yourself and the decisions that you make, but everything else is out of your control. The Dungeon Master is the everything else. In a normal RPG, this job will be done by the computer, but in D&D it is done by a person, which means that you have a lot more flexibility with what the game is capable of because that person is just as unrestricted as all the players are. D&D works by a process of narration and reaction. The DM narrates a scenario to the players and then they decide how they are going to react to that as their characters. They tell the DM after they have made their decisions, the DM considers, and then tells them what happens as a result of their actions. A useful but inaccurate representation of this in real life would be a choose-your-own-adventure book. Think of the DM as the book and the players as the reader. The book describes the situation for you, and then at the bottom of the page it has a list of options you can take. Depending on what option you as the reader pick, it will take you to a different point in the book and a different end result. D&D is the same, except there's no list of options for you at the bottom of the page. Instead, the options are literally anything that your character is capable of and that you can think of in the world. And as a result, the book, the DM, has infinite pages because they need to be able to react in an infinite number of ways to all the scenarios the players will come up with. But to illustrate this principle, here is a fairly generic description of what a DM might say to you in a game of D&D. You emerge from the dense foliage of the forest into a large open clearing. Before you is a set of ornate stone steps leading to a grand stone archway. Engraved into the archway, there are countless humanoid figures, all in combat with a ferocious dragon. Painted in blood across the stone is the phrase, "Do not enter." Standing in the archway, leaning against its walls, are two small, green, lizard-like creatures in fierce debate with one another in a language that you cannot understand. They don't seem to have noticed you yet. What do you do? This is just a typical scenario that you would get in a game of D&D. You have the setting set up for you, some possible interaction points. Now it is up to the players to decide what they are going to do. And this is where the bulk of D&D occurs. Each character now needs to make a decision. One character might be a lizard person themselves, recognize the language, and then approach the two figures, hoping to speak to them. Another might hate lizard people, in which case they might draw their weapon and immediately begin to attack the lizard people without any sort of question. Another might be completely disinterested in lizard people and have no interest in this scenario whatsoever, but they did notice a strange mushroom a mile back in the forest, so they just decide to backtrack and go check it out. You can do whatever you like in D&D, and depending on what your character does, the DM will change the scenario that follows. For example, if your party went up to the lizard people, maybe they would discover that the lizard people are actually there on guard, protecting some slaves that they captured from the town over. You would then need to decide whether or not you are going to attack the lizard people and free the slaves, or if you are going to move on your way. If you attack the lizard people, then maybe they call for reinforcements, and all of a sudden you've got a dozen lizard people on you, all attacking you, and you are outnumbered. If you go back to investigate that mushroom, maybe it turns out to be an exceptionally rare breed that you sell, and now you never have to work a day in your life. Maybe it's poisonous, and your character becomes very sick, and the party then has to go on a quest to try and save them. Any number of things can happen in D&D, and a lot of it rests on the creativity of the DM to be able to react to scenarios in interesting ways. But the general rule is, the only limit is your imagination. Okay, that's not entirely true. You can't just say whatever you want and it'll happen in the game. The game does have rules. For example, you can't just say that you want to fly around in real life, so you can't just say you want to fly around in the world of the game as well. You need to suspend your disbelief, yes, but there is a degree of realism to it. That is what gives it grounding and substance. You also roll dice to determine whether or not you succeed or fail at what you're trying to do. You use this, a d20 or a 20-sided dice. You roll it, and depending on what you roll, your DM tells you whether or not you succeed or fail at what you were trying to do. For example, if you talk to the lizard people and you roll poorly on the dice, you could unsuccessfully talk to them and they realize that you're actually a threat to them. They then become hostile to you and combat ensues. But if you succeed, maybe you can convince them to show you where the prisoners are so that you can help them escape. You see how each decision you make in D&D leads on to other decisions. Those actions have consequences, and those consequences can be good or bad, but nonetheless they lead to interesting and engaging scenarios. Because you feel like your actions have consequences, you feel like you have weight in this world. These actions and consequences pile up, because when you play D&D, you don't play it in individual segments. Each time you sit down to play a session, you don't start afresh with a new character. You generally build on a character that you're already playing and their story. Think of it like a TV show. So each time you sit down to play D&D, you're playing a different episode. Over the course of weeks, months, years even, your characters evolve and grow as people. They become more powerful in-game, and you become a more experienced player. You get attached to them as these consequences and actions pile up, and you begin to forge a story within the world that is uniquely your own. The last thing I would like to touch on is that you don't win D&D. Usually you think with a game, there is some winner at the end, you're competing with each other, but no, D&D is a very different kind of game. You work together to accomplish goals. You work together to rescue the slaves, to kill the dragon. Once you complete the story of your characters and the campaign, and the dust settles, there is no winner at the end of it. There is no reward that you get for completing D&D. If you have told an enjoyable and compelling story, then you've won D&D. You can all celebrate together knowing that your teamwork and ingenuity has gotten your characters through thick and thin, through every challenge that has been put before them. You'll have good memories and you'll have bad memories, times where you've succeeded and times where you have failed. And that is why D&D is such a hard game to explain to people. Apart from the fact that it takes place completely in your mind and is completely different, vastly different to every other game out there, it is a very subjective experience. Over the course of playing this single campaign, this single storyline for weeks, months, years, you become attached to your characters in a way that is indescribable. The closest way I can describe this is how people get attached to characters in TV shows, movies, or books. Except with D&D it is different because you are actually playing this character. You have a far more personal connection to them than any TV show or book could ever give you, believe it or not. Which is why when your characters fall into the enemy's trap, it is real anxiety and panic that grips you as a player, because even though it's not real, you've become immersed in the story. Just like how you're immersed in the story of a book or a TV show. Even though those characters don't exist, you care about them. Dungeons & Dragons is a fantastic and versatile game, and people play it for many reasons. I'm a storyteller at heart, so for me, the interactive medium of D&D is something that simply cannot be matched. It is much more satisfying for me to write out a story for D&D and see how the players react to it, build the story along with them as we are playing the game, rather than just pen something onto a piece of paper and enjoy people reading it passively. Some people enjoy just being able to let go of the pressures of their normal life and even for just a few hours, sit down at a table and have fun with your friends. But no matter what reason you play D&D for, it is a truly unique experience. It is a game that has captured the hearts of so many people. There is a reason why so many creatives cite D&D as one of the strongest influences in their youth as they were growing up, because the creativity it allows is vastly superior to any other medium. And because of how experiential D&D is, it also makes it really hard for me to explain to you exactly what it's like. Honestly, the best way to learn D&D is to just sit down and play a game, even if it's just once. You never have to do it again, but sitting down and playing it will give you a far greater understanding than anything I can tell you sitting up here. But despite that, I hope that I have given you some sort of foundational knowledge on what D&D is and explained some of the basic concepts to you. If you're interested in following up on this video and maybe finding out how D&D works at a more mechanical level, feel free to click the link up here, that'll be part 2. For the rest of you, I hope you have enjoyed your stay at the Dungeon Inn, and I'll see you next time.